we're going to continue our discussion with difference makers, the people that we are finding are stepping up and trying to deal with the issues that are making our system dysfunctional and polarized, trying to work for solutions, trying to make change. Sometimes under the category of serendipity, you never know what you're going to find, and I was awake in the middle of the night the other night. I'm doing some channel surfing, and the next thing you know, I'm watching a segment, I think on CNN, and I'm watching the funniest political ads I have ever seen. Well, it turns out these aren't real political ads, they're satirical ads, as I should have suspected. And they're produced by a group called Represent Us, who is making a difference, as I said. And they are trying to solve some problems in campaign finance reform, pass an anti-corruption act, and deal with real problem solving. So I've reached out to them. They've agreed to join us today. So with us today is Mansur Gidfar, who is the communications director for Represent Us. Mansur, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You guys, I don't know, it's like 3 in the morning and I'm laughing hysterically, and I don't think I went back to bed. I was laughing so hard. So how did you come up with the idea to bring humor to the political situation? That doesn't happen very often.
Well, the way we came up with the idea for, Gil Fulbright and the Honest Political Ads campaign is we saw a study from the Annenberg Public Policy Center that talked about how viewers of Stephen Colbert's show, his series he did on the Colbert Super PAC, were actually more informed about the way money corrupts American politics than consumers of any other form of media. So better than cable news, better than people who are reading the newspaper every day. So we saw a huge opportunity to use satire to kind of educate the public about our issue and push people towards some ways to fix this problem.
So let's talk about the issue. This is an organization, Represent Us, and you're dedicated to dealing with fixing campaign finance.
That's right, and we actually brand ourselves as an anti-corruption organization because the problems we're talking about actually go beyond campaign finance. The issue we're really trying to tackle is that there is a culture of legalized corruption in American politics. And it has a lot to do with the way money is pouring into the political system, and that goes beyond campaign finance reform, although that's certainly an important component. You have to talk about ethics reform, congressional conflicts of interest, lobbying reform, outside groups. So what we're doing is advocating for a piece of model legislation called the American Anti-Corruption Act, and that's, a comprehensive plan to fix, all of the above, and we're looking to adapt that to the local and state level first to build momentum for federal reform.
So your organization, I think you were telling me, is about a year old.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did it come together? How did this group get formed?
Our organization was founded by Josh Silver, who is the former CEO and director of Free Press, and he was doing a lot of work around, media consolidation and trying to secure, things like net neutrality and a free and open internet, and he kept running into the same roadblock over and over, which is that members of Congress had very, very, very little interest in working with their organization on things that were very much in the public interest, because they had to, make concessions to the special interests that were funding their campaigns and offering them lobbying jobs after they retired from Congress. So Josh decided to leave and found our organization, Represent Us, under the sort of guiding theory that, until we address the issue of the influence of money in American politics, we're going to keep hitting roadblocks on every other issue.
And was Josh actually lobbying at the time on net neutrality?
He was working mostly on media consolidation, and I believe a little bit around net neutrality as well. And you see even on net neutrality, even today, you see how, someone like President Obama, who ran on this platform of lobbyists will have no place in my White House, has since, appointed the former head lobbyist for, the big telecom companies to head the FCC, which has direct oversight of net neutrality.
So he's seeing corruption, we'll use your word, and he decides to form this organization. Take me a little bit more of the formative stages. How do you get involved, and what's the structure of the organization? How do you get your decisions made?
Well, I got involved about a year ago. Before this, I was doing sort of political news at a website called Upworthy, and I was an editor on the 2012 campaign, and I noticed the same thing. Every sort of political issue I was covering was being impacted in some way by money pouring into the political system. Our organization, we're really really focused on running campaigns like the Honest Politician and, putting out good public education that, informs people about what's going on and, lets them know that there's a solution to this problem, but also does it in a way that's, compelling and entertaining. Because I think a lot of times this issue is kind of unfairly cast as, wonky or, too numbers heavy. And we think it's incredibly important information, and, it gets a bad rap. It's not nearly as boring as some of the articles you read would have you think. And then we also put a really heavy focus, as I was saying earlier, on organizing, on getting people involved at the state and local level. So we have a really, really great organizing staff that works with volunteers all across the country to try and pass state and local anti-corruption laws.
So just structurally, though, I know you have a board. And are you a 501c4? How are you set up?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So we have a C4 and a C3. So our 501c4 is for advocacy work, and then our 501c3 does public education. And one of the things we're actually trying to reform is, the disclosure around these outside groups, such as 501c organizations, which we are. So, we always provide a list of our donors on request. If people have, any questions about that, they can go to represent us, represent.us/about.
And I'm glad you're doing that, because I think one of the biggest problems with the system is a lot of these organizations are hiding their donors and their contributions. You don't have that transparency that you need to see where the money's coming from.
Absolutely. And, one of the components of the Anti-Corruption Act is, full disclosure of all political money. So that's, we're a big, big believer in transparency.
And then the reason I'm asking about your board is I think a lot of times these moneyed entities that are getting involved in politics, you don't even know who is making the decisions. It could be just one person had an idea at breakfast. So you guys actually have a board that someone has to vote on direction and ideas, or how's it set up?
We actually are a very, self-guiding organization with our sort of senior staff really kind of charts our course. Our board we have a really great board of advisors, which is made up of kind of thought leaders on the left and the right. We were really strong believers in making sure that we are a nonpartisan organization. So it's mostly the senior staff actually making the day-to-day decisions, and then our board of advisors kind of helps us stay grounded and make sure we're keeping our message nonpartisan and accessible to everyone.
So one of your goals is to pass the American Anti-Corruption Act. Did you create this, or was this something someone else created and you're just kicking the ball down the field a little further?
So we drafted the act in collaboration with a bunch of really great constitutional attorneys who helped us out from the Campaign Legal Center, as well as in collaboration with Trevor Potter, who's a former chair of the Federal Elections Commission, and he is also probably best known as the Stephen Colbert's lawyer for Colbert Super PAC. And we also had some help from Harvard law professor and kind of a noted reformer on this issue, Lawrence Lessig. So we crafted the act in collaboration with them. So it's kind of a brainchild of the Represent Us, advisors and organization.
So why don't you walk the viewers through the act? What are the top, few elements of the act that you think are necessary, and why, and how they're going to solve your problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So the act is 11 provisions long, so I'm not going to go through all of them point by point, but I'll talk about what it does generally. And then if folks want to read the entire act, we actually have the full copy of it online if you go to anticorruptionact.org, so you can actually see the language of it yourself. Again, we're big believers in transparency. So generally speaking, the act is going to do three things. The first thing it would do is make it illegal for members of Congress to accept campaign contributions from the PACs or lobbyists of special interests they regulate. So, for example, if you're a member of Congress and you sit on, the House Armed Services Committee, for example, and a defense contractor wants to give you a campaign contribution, you can't accept that campaign contribution unless you recuse yourself first from voting on any legislation that could then benefit, that defense contractor. The second thing it would do is require full disclosure of all political money, so it would put an end to all this secretive money sort of pouring into the political system right now. So that, in practical terms, would mean no more of these, anonymous attack ads from, the vaguely patriotic sounding groups like Americans for a More American America. And the third thing it would do is provide every American with a $100 tax voucher to give to the candidate of their choice. Right now, if you want to run for office in this country and you set out with the idea of being kind of an outsider and you don't want to capitulate to special interests, it becomes very, very difficult to run a viable campaign. Because if you're not willing to throw these, $2,500 a plate fundraisers, if you're not willing to sort of let, special interests kind of guide the course of your policy, it becomes very difficult to raise the money you need to hire a campaign staff and put ads on TV. So by giving every single voter a $100 tax voucher, a candidate could then credibly go to the voters in their district, the people they're supposed to represent, and make an appeal directly to them. Because right now, not everyone has money to give candidates. So the voucher system would solve that problem.
So Mansur, let me interrupt you for a second here. I assume this $100 idea of publicly funded campaign, so to speak, that would be if the act was passed at the national level, or are you also trying to add a voucher for state level corruption acts?
That's a great question. So the end goal would, of course, be a federal voucher system. But one of the great things about pushing for state level anti-corruption acts is our research has found that if you were to establish a state level voucher system, those vouchers, which would be administered by the state's Treasury Department, could also be given to candidates for federal office in that state. For example, if we were to say, pass a Montana Anti-Corruption Act, you could give that $100, which would be administered by the state of Montana, to the candidates for Montana's congressional seat and Senate seats. So it's a way of kind of building momentum from the ground up at the local level and sort of, taking incremental steps towards a full federal system.
So again, I interrupted you. Tell me if there are other parts of the act you wanted to focus on, and we can move on once you've...
I think those are the biggest three. Another thing it would do is close the revolving door between Washington and K Street. So right now, what happens pretty often is that, a member of Congress will be sitting down with a lobbyist, and the lobbyist will say, hey, Mr. Congressman, when you're done doing your work in Washington, you should really come work for our lobbying firm. Now, it used to be that only 2% of retiring members of Congress went on to careers as lobbyists. But now that number is over 50%, and that's because members of Congress who take that deal and become a lobbyist after they retire get on average about a 1,500% raise. So we would make it illegal for a retiring member of Congress to go work as a lobbyist for a period of 5 years, sort of a cooling off period, because right now we see, these job offers being used essentially as a deferred bribe.
Now, I just curiously, why even 5 years? Why not just say if you were elected to office, you can't lobby? Would that be illegal?
It does become a little trickier legally to do a lifetime ban. We also feel like 5 years is a strong enough cooling off period to serve as an actual deterrent. Just because the makeup of Capitol Hill can change so much in a 5-year period, it means that there will have been time for presidential administration to potentially change. It means there will have been a couple of midterm elections. So, the capital of, snapping up a retiring congressman is greatly diminished when you have to wait that long.
I agree with you. 5 years sounds like a nice amount of time. I'm just suggesting my personal preference is why just not ban it. But if you think there might be some legal issues that would not be associated with the time ban, I get that.
Yep. The other thing is, there are many, there could conceivably down the line be members of Congress who do feel passionately about, certain issues and would like to advocate for them in a way that's not, entirely motivated by the money. So essentially, we're trying to remove the financial incentive to offer a retiring member of Congress a massive raise immediately after they leave office, because that gives, the special interests who are offering that job huge influence over that member of Congress for the time they have remaining.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. So you've got this organization set up, but as you said, it's a kind of a grassroots organization. Tell me how the grassroots structure works and what your grassroots armies looks like these days.
So we run these basically local chapters, and we've got, after our first year, we have about 20 active right now in different cities all across the country. And these are volunteer-led, so we've had over 3,000 people sign up to volunteer for us. And these are folks who, they go knock on doors, they, hold events in town, they, pass out flyers, and they just try and get people in their local community engaged to kind of form the organizing backbone. So when we show up to a state or a municipality to do a local anti-corruption act, we have a base of support already, and it gives people a way to channel all the energy that's out there on this issue right now. I think people have never been more fed up with the way money is influencing the political system. So we're really trying to give people tools to kind of organize and act on that, because otherwise you end up with sort of just, you don't want people to get resigned and cynical. We always want to show people that there's something they can do.
Are most of these people that have been engaged with you so far, I looked on your website, a very young-looking organization. Is this like a millennial-based type effort, or are you getting a full spectrum of participants?
We're getting a really broad spectrum of participants, really broad age ranges, really broad political leaning. So we have everyone from, members of the Tea Party to Occupy Wall Street activists and everyone in between. And that's, I think, been sort of the most inspiring thing in these early stages is that, the sort of ideological divide that you tend to see in press coverage and that gets hyped a lot by the DC media, isn't present at all on this issue. That's not to say that everyone agrees on every political issue when they come volunteer for our organization, but on the, corrupting influence on money in politics, everyone's on the same page.
So one of the things I've talked with other guests about is the fact that, let's say this is the greatest idea anyone has ever had. I like your idea. You actually have to pass legislation. You're asking the people who are benefiting from the system to pass legislation to limit what we're calling their incumbency protection. So how do you get people to vote against their own interest to give you what you want?
That's a great question. So at least initially, you don't, right? And this is why we've seen, this phenomenon you described, getting the fox to put a lock on the hen house. This is why we've seen the same campaign finance proposals, the same disclosure proposals come to Washington year in, year out, and they always either fail or get watered down to the point where you might as well not pass one at all, because it allows politicians to sort of declare victory without actually fixing the problem. So what we're doing in pursuing the local strategy first is looking at the 13 states in the country where you can place a comprehensive statewide anti-corruption act directly on the ballot. So you can bypass the legislature. You don't have to rely on, these legislators who might not want to limit their own, incumbency protection racket. And you can just pass the law directly. And, our polling has shown that if you give a ballot initiative with the content we're proposing directly to the people, it'll win. We ran a poll statewide in the state of Montana, actually, that found that when you explain to people point by point what's in the act, support actually goes up, which very, very rarely happens with ballot initiatives. Our pollster actually told us that it's, the highest numbers he's seen on a ballot initiative in the past 30 years. And then the sort of long-term plan with this strategy is to demonstrate the political popularity of these ideas and provide lawmakers with an incentive to get on board. Because the one thing that's the driving force for every politician in this country is keeping their seat, is staying in office. So if we expect anything to change, we have to make it clear that, lawmakers who are on the wrong side of this issue will start to lose. And that means going local first.
So when you have your grassroots, we have an election coming up here in a few months. Will you be asking legislators to sign pledges that you can then communicate to your base that whether someone signed the pledge or not? How are you trying to turn the screws a little bit in that regard at all?
Yeah, we've been collaborating with an organization run by Lawrence Lessig called Mayday PAC. You've probably seen them in the news if you're following money in politics. It's a crowd-funded super PAC. And they raised over $6 million in small dollar contributions, which was then matched with another $6 million from, some investors in Silicon Valley. And the whole idea behind Mayday PAC is to unseat politicians who are supporters of reform and support politicians who are willing to vote for, the kind of tough anti-corruption laws we support. So that's an effort that's being run by Lawrence Lessig and Mayday PAC, and we've kind of thrown our full support behind that effort as a political accountability arm. And then in terms of what Represent Us is doing, we're really focusing on local legislative wins, local ballot initiatives, municipal laws going into 2014.
So would you expect to get, obviously you'd expect to get your first laws passed at the local level before you'd have something at the national level?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you want to look at other examples of the strategy, you can look at what the proponents of marriage equality have done over the past 20 years. Another example, which I think we're especially familiar with, I'm from Colorado as well, is what proponents of marijuana legalization have done. You know, if you look at where marijuana legalization was polling, you know, not even 20 years ago, here's an issue that was sort of a punchline on the late night talk shows, right? Legalize it, man. And what they did was employed a very smart strategy. They built bipartisan support for legalization. You know, they went to progressives and they appealed to libertarians. They built a bipartisan coalition, and they started targeting the states, you know, and lo and behold, in the last election, both Washington State and my home state of Colorado, I should say our home state of Colorado, legalized marijuana. And as a result of these local wins, as a direct result of these local wins, I would argue, you have this issue that used to be polling under 40% nationally, now polling at, you know, well over 50%. A majority of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. You know, that's how you move the needle on national reforms. And, you know, the polling numbers on money, getting money out of politics, on passing tough new anti-corruption laws are higher than support for legalizing marijuana ever was at any point. So we're not starting from a bad place at all.
So I want to take a break here, and I'm going to run one of these new Honest Gil ads, and then let's talk about that a bit.
Hi, I'm Gil Fulbright. The people that run my campaign, they've made this commercial, and I'm in it. This campaign, it's not about me. It's about crafting a version of me that'll appeal to you. A version that visits random work sites with paid actors pointing at things. A version of me that doesn't find old people loathsome or pointless. Has a conventionally attractive yet curiously still family. Listening to my constituents, legislating, these are things I don't do. What I do is spend about 70% of my time raising funds for re-election. I'd do anything to stay in office. My name's Gil Fulbright, but hell, I'll change my name to Phil Goldbright, or Bill Fulbright, or fill up my mouth with farts. These are the things that are important to me. And these are the fine people that finance my campaign. Now, in order to do these things, I have to stay in office. And to stay in office, I have to keep these guys happy. Now, if any of these things make these guys unhappy, well, my hands are tied. So come November, the choice is clear. Do you want another spineless mouthpiece for special interest and lobbyists, or a spineless mouthpiece for special interest and lobbyists? I'm fill up my mouth with farts, and I approve this message.
So Mansur, tell us a little bit about Gil, and tell us a little bit about the Honest ad and how this campaign's going.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gil Fulbright is the honest politician. So his motto, as you can probably see from the ad we just showed, is, you know, I'll sell you out to special interests and lobbyists, but I'll sell you out to your face. He's a satirical candidate, and we're actually sending him to the state of Kentucky to mount a satirical Senate campaign against Mitch McConnell and Allison Lundergan Grimes. And we picked Kentucky because the Kentucky Senate race is on track to be the most expensive Senate race in the history of the United States. It's on track to cost $100 million, and both McConnell, who's the Republican candidate, and Grimes, who's the Democratic candidate, are receiving over 3/4 of their campaign money from outside of Kentucky, and they're being supported by, you know, a slew of outside groups, the vast majority of which are based outside of Kentucky. Actually, in the last quarter, Mitch McConnell's super PAC, Kentuckians for Strong Leadership, didn't receive any money from people inside Kentucky. So we chose to focus on the Kentucky Senate race because it's really emblematic of the problems we're seeing nationwide. You know, we're seeing this in every Senate race, every race for the House. And we want to kind of piggyback on the amount of media attention that's being focused on the state of Kentucky to sort of steal the spotlight and get the country talking about what money is doing to our political system and what we can do to turn things around. And it's actually been a huge success on that front. You know, we've already seen Honest Gil on CNN, on Fox News, you know, on the Washington Post, USA Today. You know, he's driven over 100 articles about, you know, the effect of money in politics in this election. So, and he hasn't even been to Kentucky yet. So we're really excited to see, you know, what comes next.
And now you're on none of the above. You can't, it doesn't get any higher than that.
Yeah, it can't go any higher.
So let me ask you a little twist on what you're talking about. The money's coming from out of state. I've been hearing these numbers lately, not just about the 1%, but the 1% of the 1% who's really putting in 30, 40% of the money in politics. Are you tracking those numbers at all?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of the best resources out there is actually a database run by the Center for Responsive Politics. They're a nonpartisan research organization based in Washington, D.C. Their website is opensecrets.org, and they do these donor demographics that talk about exactly the stats you're describing. I think my favorite stat on this front is in the last election, 60% of the super PAC money that got spent. And keep in mind, this is several hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, this is, I believe, $300 million we're talking about, came from 0.00002% of the population. So, you know, the whole 1%, 99% binary is actually way off. It's more like we are the 99.99998% would be more accurate.
Right, but of course the problem we have is you've got a Supreme Court who has to weigh free speech versus corruption, and they seem like they're going in the opposite direction from where you want.
Yes and no. I mean, the Supreme Court's rulings and, you know, the infamous Citizens United, there's a bunch of other cases prior to Citizens United that, you know, also went in an unfavorable direction, and most recently McCutcheon v. FEC are definitely unhelpful, but, you know, the notion that we can't do anything to combat the influence of money in politics without amending the Constitution or until we have a new Supreme Court is just not true, frankly. You know, there are plenty of reforms we could pass tomorrow that could be held constitutional that would have a real impact because, you know, and those have nothing to do with the Citizens United ruling or the McCutcheon ruling. You know, this idea of introducing a system of citizen-funded elections using our $100 tax voucher idea is completely constitutional. You can do that anytime. You know, lobbying reform you can do without amending the Constitution. Disclosure reform, ethics reform, you know, strengthening the coordination rules to make sure that candidates aren't working directly with their super PACs, which was one of the, you know, the things that was actually most stressed in the Citizens United ruling was the Supreme Court said, you know, these independent groups can spend unlimited money, but they absolutely can't be coordinating with candidates. And we have plenty of evidence to suggest that they are, so you can make that illegal. So I really do reject the notion that, you know, until we change the Supreme Court, there's nothing we can do. There are plenty of laws we can change right now. We should.
Now, when you look at the state level, just out of curiosity, are you looking for states where you think if it gets to their state level Supreme Court, you might find a court that's a little more compatible with the things you're doing, or are you not being that sophisticated in your approach?
Oh, no, that's absolutely part of our approach. You know, when we were still evaluating states to pursue in 2015 and 2016, and when we look at a state, you know, we look at, can we put the entire a comprehensive anti-corruption act that will actually fix the problem at the state level? Because keep in mind, you know, state legislatures and governor's offices oftentimes have the same problems with money in politics as the federal level, oftentimes worse. So we want to make sure it's a state where we can actually make a real, tangible difference by passing a new law. And we also, you know, have a legal team look at, you know, the specifics of the state laws, because obviously we need to tweak things based on, you know, what laws are already on the books in certain states, you know, the court environment in that state, but that's all definitely taken into account.
Well, Mansur, it's been great of you to join us today. Again, for the viewers' sake, tell us how we find you, and if a viewer wants to get involved, how do they get involved in your effort?
Thanks so much. So you can find our organization at represent.us. That's represent.us. And you can read up on the Anti-Corruption Act at anticorruptionact.org. And if you want to watch, you know, the honest political ads you saw on this show, or if you want to see a little more from Honest Gill and follow his campaign as he sort of crashes the Kentucky Senate race, you should go to honestgill.com. Wow, let's edit around that, please. And Google Gill Fulbright.
And by the way, Honest Gill is one L from the signs right behind your head.
Oh yeah, you can see it. We got him right here.
Well, the only thing I'm worried about is what happens if he wins a write-in.
We considered this. We spoke to some political experts in Kentucky. They really don't think it's likely that, you know, what we're doing is going to inspire a write-in campaign. We're not asking people to write in Gill's name. And Gill Fulbright is, of course, not a real person. He's played by an actor, so his name doesn't appear on the ballot. So we're not particularly worried about that. But who knows? Maybe 2016, Gill Fulbright for president.
I'll bet he gets a few votes. I don't know if you're aware of this. There was a Democratic primary for governor in Nevada, and I don't know why, but they effectively had a none of the above category there, and the none of the above won in Nevada recently.
Well, who knows? Maybe we'll be talking to Senator Gill come this time next year.
There you go. Well, just in case, I think we'll run one more ad after the close of the interview and get our viewers all the more excited. Thank you so much for being with us today, and maybe we can have a rematch in a few months and see how the election cycle played out for you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gil Fulbright. My campaign advisors have made this shameless piece of pandering, and I'm in it. Beautiful Kentucky. A place I'm so proud to call home ever since I established legal residency here so I can run for public office. From everything that Kentucky is known for to whatever people there do, I have a deep-seated love for Kentucky that is directly proportional to the amount of money I raise there, 25%. So that means I spend 25% of my time caring about big in-state donors, 75% of my time caring about big out-of-state donors. But my friends, the rest of my time is entirely dedicated to the hard-working people of Kentucky. People of Kentucky may say that all of this out-of-state funding will keep politicians from focusing on them. Are they really saying that? I wouldn't know. I'm not there to listen to them. I'm Gil Fulbright, and I'll work hard for Kentucky or whoever finances my campaign.